Exactly how important is water in agriculture? Well, in this episode, we will spend the next hour talking good old H2O. Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Calen. He is Brandon. If you are seeing the channel for the first time, like, comment, and subscribe. Find us on the links below. Today, we discuss water. To me, it seems fitting since this year's been hard on everyone with the current drought. There has been little to no moisture all summer long, starting in April until recently. Thankfully, there have been a few days where mom and dad did get some rain, but that's still been few and far between, like I said. Because of this issue and the whole problem in the region, not just in Montana, the hay prices have skyrocketed and ranches are liquidating herds. You can check out the link above and get more context on the situation from overall issues, talking about how we may have had to plan for that and go about doing that ourselves this year. But with that, moving on into the water note, instead of going down my normal notes monologue like I normally do, we will begin this week's conversation with a question I will pose to Dad, which is this: how important is water to agriculture? Specifically thinking, I typically ponder the idea of how people typically think of crops for producers in agriculture, but for those of us who exclusively deal with livestock instead, how vital is water to their operation?
I mean, water is, I don't care where you're at, who you are, water's life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as simple as that. And we normally are able to obtain it for ourselves, divert water. Hell, the Romans were doing that. And very, very well. You take a look at a spot we visited in the Southwest, Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. They were diverting water then and using water runoffs to a very lesser degree, but doing it to make their crops of very, very small plots for their corn. If you don't have water in adequate amounts, you're not going to make it in agriculture. I mean, that's just the way it is. And most of us depend on what comes out of the sky, because there's a whole lot more unirrigated ground than there is irrigated ground. And so we concentrate water in certain areas to maximize what we can't in areas where we can't divert the water or pull water out of the ground, and be able to maximize in those areas. So water's everything. I mean, I'd like to see you go for a week without drinking sometime and call me up, see how it works.
So I kind of have. It was called
Yeah.
wrestling. It's not fun. Honestly, I mean, being in the medical sphere for the Army, that's the one thing we're all constantly harping on people. And I mean, even my friends are like, so I feel this way, kind of blah, blah, blah. It's like, do you have a headache? Like, yeah, drink water. Like 90% of the time it's solved by drinking water. Oh, your joints hurt? Drink water. It's probably because the cartilage and all the things in your joints are dehydrated and they need the water to lubricate themselves. Your blood is water. Your cells are water. Water is everything. So yeah, I understand the importance, but
yeah,
I mean, go ahead.
That's in the simplest terms. You're right. And you think about us as just as a human body, we are chronically dehydrated. Most people, I mean, any doctor will tell you that. It doesn't even take a doctor to tell you that.
And especially people like you and I who enjoy a good beer or a nice whiskey on occasion. That does nothing but take more water from your system.
Right.
So
Correct.
You have to come back with more.
Well, and there's the whole group of people that like pretzels and potato chips. Salt sucks that water out. I mean, we're constantly inundating our bodies with things that assault the pun.
Bad joke.
Yeah, there you go. That draw that water away. So in agriculture, you got the same thing. You got wind, you got heat, you got usage. I mean, plants are still growing. They're taking out of that soil the bank of moisture that's in it, if there's in it. And so it's there. It's something that is not controllable for us and for a lot of people. But even when it is controllable, you take a look at some of the hay ground this year in our area, and we talk about drought, how we've had no water. That's in this upper northwest part of the nation. The South has been inundated with water this year.
Yeah, they
You
have.
know, I
This has
mean,
been a
those
great
poor
summer down
buggers.
here in Texas, believe it or not. It's been high 80s, low 90s, and everybody's like, this is a great summer. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Yeah. Well, you're right in that Goldilocks zone between the water and no water.
Yep.
So you've been able to, yeah, you got lucky there. But uh, we're looking at some of the hay issues that you mentioned where we don't have any. And why is that? Hey, if you can put water on a crop, you should get the same amount of crop, right? Well, not true. I mean, if it's so hot that even putting water on something under a pivot or some irrigation, but the heat prevents growth of that plant, that tells you what's
Right.
what the problem is there, that all the water in the world isn't going to solve it. It's just too hot. It's got too much heat to it, too much sunshine. Sunshine's a good thing, but not in the amount of the heat that comes with it in that index. So that's also caused a lot of loss in crops, even on a lot of the irrigated spots. People we've bought hay from historically, couldn't supply it this year, and I don't think they're going to be able to supply it for themselves. I'm kind of watching the hay fields that comes off of, and man, that's rough. I
Mhm.
feel bad for them, and they're scrambling like we are. We're just hoping that we can make it through. And you talked about herd liquidation. You don't have enough water for enough grass. You can't hold the animals. You got carrying capacity you got to take care of, and so we've recently taken 15 pairs, actually totaled altogether 16 pairs of cows and calves to town. Some of our older cows they're gone. We're anticipating that. We know we won't be able to support it. Now, in spite of that, we've gotten about 2.5 inches of rain in the last 3 weeks. And there have been just super downpours.
Which is also
But
crazy for August in Montana. Like
yes,
that does not happen.
no, 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 it doesn't. And it's like when it does, it's usually a downpour and a cloud burst and washes a lot. Well, this didn't wash all that much. It a lot of it went right in the ground. Did a little bit, but not like you would think. And believe it or not, in a very, very short time, we've had some upper 70s, low 80s, and highs for the day, and we're seeing green grass starting to come. That's how resilient these grasslands are. So it's not much. It's not going to save us by any means, but it absolutely makes you feel better, I guess, to see some green grass out there. That's you know it's that long. It's coming up, but it's not going to sustain us. But it is just nice to see that, man, you can get wiped out and very quickly start to recover. That recovery wouldn't last long. I mean, it's not, we got a lot of moisture in the soil bank there, but it's what it is for now. And, you just go with it, and hopefully the temperatures stay mild and we get some fall growth. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah. You said something about wind too, and I wanted to bring that to at least a quick point. The the wind that occurs in Montana, especially on the eastern side of the Rockies, is it's tremendous. People talk about, hurricane type winds and stuff like that, and then they're only talking like 40 miles an hour, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I've been living in a hurricane my whole life. But so anyway, the thing
Yeah.
is that wind though, and this kind of goes into like winter as well. Wind is a huge dehydrator as well
Oh,
of not only us but the animals,
right.
and it
And
doesn't
plants.
seem, it doesn't make sense. Well, yeah, I guess it does take it from the plants too, but it doesn't make sense at all that the wind would do it, but it does, and it dehydrates you. And then I think about that, especially in the wintertime, you get we call it wind burn. Your skin gets super dehydrated and whatnot, and it's not from the cold, it's from the wind.
Right.
And then in the wintertime, you've got snow all over, and people are like, hey, you've got plenty of moisture. I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. Like it crusts over and it's like ice. It's not really water until, maybe it starts to thaw out in the fall or the springtime. But even then, a lot of it, because of the nature of the weather, it also becomes, like you've said about the most recent rains, it becomes runoff rather than soaking into the ground, unfortunately.
Right.
So I think that's something to keep in mind too, is, winter and wind, there's moisture there, but there's also not, and it helps with the dehydration process, which does not behoove us in trying to raise we talk crops, like we said, a lot of people think water with crops, but it doesn't also assist with the livestock either.
Right. Well, and you think about why it's so important to have fresh water available in the wintertime. What does any survival course, winter survival course, tell you about having the chance to drink, or if you have snow available, what do you do with it? You just eat it?
No, you always got to
No.
boil it. Yeah.
You melt that stuff down, because just eating snow takes more calories and will further dehydrate you than what you get out of it. So it's always more important to melt it down and then drink it. So um, same thing with an animal. I mean, horses, cows, they will eat that snow. And if it's a wet snow, it's a different story. But there's seldom do we have those wet, heavy snows. That's
Mm-mm.
usually a late spring storm or late fall storm that we'll get something that's pretty heavy type with a lot of moisture in it. That's not that common. I mean, it happens, but very short lived, and it's certainly not something that lasts all winter long. So keeping that fresh water open for those animals so they don't dehydrate, because they're eating dry hay. You were putting hay out for them, which is already, by definition, it's dehydrated enough so that you can put it in a bale and it won't mold, and it will sustain for storage. But the wind on plants, I always God, I just dread it when we get a really good rain. It's like, oh, this is fantastic. And I don't like the fast temperature changes, because that's when we get our winds. And we'll have a really good storm, and all of a sudden it'll warm up really fast, like, ah, crap, here comes the wind. And it will literally, you can just watch it. Think about what wind does. It dries the ground out, and it dries plants out, and we get a little heat with it, and it's just like it sears, and you'll watch that stuff just brown. And so it's a balance. We need to have the right amount of weather, water when we need it. If we could order it, it would be great, but that isn't the way it is. So um, it's hard to stockpile water. You got reservoirs and things like that, but your soil bank is the best place it can go.
We typically have, when it comes to water, we think, yeah, when it comes to water, we think legal rights, legal abilities, legal everything. Water is such a commodity, especially in Montana, that I thought it was important that we lay out the foundations and the fundamentals of the Montana water rights system. So I went to waterquality.montana.edu. I'll put the link below in the description if anyone's interested. It's a PDF, but I grabbed the 6 basic fundamentals that it says in the Montana's water rights system, and they are: 1, the Montana's water belongs to the state for the use of its people. Therefore, water right holders do not own the water; they possess the right to use the water. The number 2 one is doctrine of prior appropriation. In parentheses, it says first in time, first in right, which means it guides Montana's overall water rights system. So if you come to the water first and you have ability to it first, you are a priority, and then the next guy down the road, and so on and so forth.
Well, and I think what they mean by that is who speaks up first, right? Because you can have someone who's far downstream have the first water right, and they're
Mhm.
supposed to get all of the water that they're entitled to before the ones that are even upstream. Well, how does that work, and how can you manage that? And I know some serious lawsuits that have taken place right locally for years that were like, holy cow. I mean, neighbor against neighbor, and they were ugly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it says prior appropriation. So if you've come to the state and you've
Yeah,
gotten your paperwork and everything done first, yeah, that
right.
that makes absolute sense.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
about the filing. But anyway, sorry,
yeah.
I didn't
Okay.
want to. I
Well,
didn't want
it'd
to
be
clear that up.
no. I think that's good because I would have misinterpreted that wrong if you would have not have said that. But that is important because it's like a stake, a claim stake on a mine or something
Yes,
like that. If
correct.
you're, yes, is water that valuable that it would be equivalent to gold or something? Yeah, it's more valuable than gold. In fact, I would argue, because you can't do anything without that water. Number 3, use it or lose it. A water right holder must use the water or risk losing the right to it. That makes sense. You can't just hoard it all and not use it. Number 4, the water diverted must be for a beneficial use, and all beneficial uses are equal under the law. So nobody gets one step up on the other. Number 5, a
Well,
water
I think
right.
what they're saying there is that my cows are living beings, so they're more important than somebody's alfalfa crop.
Yeah, that
There is no importance. It's whoever's in need and what they have for their operation or what their usage
I think
is.
that's a good example. Yeah. Number 5, a water right is a property right and can be separated from the land, just like mineral rights. What else is there? There's
Well, there's gas, oil, mineral.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. And then the final one for the fundamentals of Montana's water right system are any change in the purpose, place of use, place of storage, or place of diversion of a water right must first be approved by the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, or the DNRC. So if you're going to change anything with that, you need to have it approved and you need to apply and go through that process before anything else happens. So what are kind of your initial comments on that before we really start? I got some like 3 or 4 questions after this, but
Yeah.
what are some of your initial?
Well, and that diversion of water means and getting the okay for that is, say somebody wants to put a pump into the river and they've got water rights and they need to dig that out a little bit in order to put a kind of a deep spot in the bank of the river. You got to get approval for that. And so, I mean, it's very tightly controlled, and there are some very very large consequences to that if you don't. They take that very very seriously, and they even get the EPA and the Fish and Game involved with it. With they call them 310 permits, where you have to have a permit to do any kind of changes to any stream bank or alteration of it for any purpose, and that isn't just agriculture. That could be putting in levees, for instance, next to some place that's going to be developed for, say, a business, or say a trader court, anything like that that would go in, and you want to protect that. That's you still have to have those permits if you're going to do anything with that the stream bed or the bank. It's important enough that our Montana Constitution specifically talks about water and the quality of water, what we do in our state with it. So, which is, kind of amazing that back, I think they redid that at a constitutional convention. I think it was in 72, but that was, you know, the convention. It was not the original, and the original state constitution was pretty specific about the importance of water.
Well, and that's what, 130, almost 140 years ago, because
1889. Yep.
yeah, Montana 1889 was when it was finally brought into the union. And what does a state have to do before it gets to the union? It has to have a constitution and have everything ratified. So yeah, it's a process. The You talked about repercussions, and that was going to be after this next question, but I think it's important that we just cover it now. Some of the repercussions for taking too much water are oftentimes limited to like access or the flow to others, like you've kind of alluded to.
Yeah.
Um, Stuff that I've heard of and the things I've understand is mainly these 4 things, and you can correct me if I'm wrong and kind of let me know, but loss of rights to the water, fines, you lose certain access or must allow access to others, and then finally jail or prison time. Has that been accurate? Have you known anybody that goes to jail? Probably he'd probably be county jail if anything for
Yeah,
doing something
I
like that.
don't know of anybody who's been jailed for it. I'm sure they probably threatened at
Yeah,
times, but there is, I mean, the old saying is whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting,
yeah,
is true. It's especially out here. But uh, yeah, you're supposed to play nice, basically, and when you have your share of water, others get theirs. Well, that doesn't always happen, and they got people called ditch riders, especially on some of the flood irrigated areas or areas where water is transported through canal system, that they are monitoring and watching, and they have head gates, and they are in charge of making sure everybody gets the adequate amount of water. And if there's not enough water for everybody, everybody's supposed to suffer together.
Yeah,
Essentially,
well,
is
in a way,
you
it's
know
kind of like communism. Like, in order for everybody to survive, everybody's got to survive off of the same amount.
right.
You know?
But that doesn't always happen, and it doesn't
Yeah,
always happen frequently.
yeah,
I should be more accurate because there's some guys that they just flat don't care about you. I don't care
yeah,
if you're my neighbor and we've been here 100 and some years or not, and our families have grown up. Don't care. That's my water,
yeah.
and they're just taking and stealing water, and they're screwing with head gates and opening them up and taking water when they shouldn't, or taking too much water, not shutting their water off when they should. There's a lot of that stuff that goes on constantly. So, um, you risk at that point it's probably just a civil suit with your neighbor, which is nobody wants to do that. They're always costly, and you know what? By the time it comes to the water season's over.
Yep.
So that's why the waters for fighting comes in, because people are desperate, they need it now, and it creates a really really contentious uh scenario when somebody's not playing nice, and um it's sometimes hard to combat that. And a lot of times the ditch riders, let's face it, these are guys that they're not making a lot of money at it. They're just trying to get along, and um they just kind of go with where the most pressure is, and they tend to move in that direction or away from that direction. So I know people have historically just intimidated the crap out of people, and just basically they're just stealing water, and that's not right. And they need to have a comeuppance, but it happens, because these guys are like, look, I don't make enough money in this job to do this and shut his water off and risk taking a beating. I'm not going to do that. It happens. So they can shut their water off. They can chain their head gates closed and stop their water, but occasionally do that. It's got to be pretty egregious before they do. They usually let them get away with it. Um, but that can happen. So I don't think you can revoke somebody's property rights, which water rights are.
Right.
You can't revoke them from them, but you can certainly manage
Restrict.
it away from them.
Yeah.
Yeah, restrict it or manage it away from them in real time. I could be wrong about that too. I don't think so. I think that would cause an issue, because if you try to revoke somebody's water rights, good luck.
Well, you're still
Uh,
talking, and I think this is important to cover. You and I are not. You would know better than I do when it comes to water, because you did irrigation and stuff with your grandparents growing up. But um, I just had friends that irrigated growing up, and I just knew how horrible it sucked, and I was really glad that I didn't have to. But the important part is, you brought up a couple points. One, the water, it's very finite for a certain period of time. It's the growing season. So between probably March and April all the way to about October, that's when you need the water. And if you're trying to go through the court system during that time, it's not going to matter, because it it's the here and now that you need it. But at the same time, the court system is very much involved with water rights, water access, things like that, because it's something that will always be part of Montana agriculture as long as Montana agriculture is around. And because of that, so many people make a life, a form of living one way or the other off of agriculture, whether it be small or large. They rely on water so much that it has to go through the court system. It would be the same as going through something like corporate world, and you have no uh any sort of judicial branch to help keep people in line. Otherwise it
right.
would be a free for all, and you'd have things like day trading, where people are in the background helping make calls when they shouldn't and stuff like that. It would be the Wild West in the worst sense of it. And with water, then you're going to get more, I would say probably even more uh violence, because you're going to get a little bit of shotgun justice here and there and trying to get that water back.
Well, and I keep waiting for that to kind of happen, and not here in Montana quite as much, because we don't have a lot that flows towards the west, meaning towards the Oregon, Idaho,
Hmm.
the Washington side. But there are plenty of people that have discovered a way to divert water and divert water long distances, if you want to call it that. And that's they're buying property rights in like Idaho, which does flow that direction, Washington, Oregon, and they're taking those rights and then not using the water and shipping it, letting it go to California. So you take a look at the Los Angeles Valley, that water that supports that was all diverted. And large canals there that was diverted to support that. That city could never have probably gotten the size it did without it.
I think one that's probably more important to show as an example, Los Angeles could probably get away with it one way or the other through using other means, but Las Vegas was never, if you've ever been to Vegas, you would know that there's absolutely no reason it should exist whatsoever.
That's true. That's exactly right.
And that was created by the mafia for illegal gambling, stuff like that, laundering money. And so what they did was they figured out a way to get water to them because they had access to it, and they pulled strings to make it work. And that is exactly what you're saying. Now, is there other metropolitan areas probably doing that? Yeah, more than likely. But that also draws, and here's where, we've had issues and we've explained problems with the things that we see in the metropolitan areas making decisions that will affect the other 75% of the United States, which is the flyover states and so on, so forth, is that those decisions to pull water from those key locations have a very real impact on whether or not agriculture will survive in some areas. It could very well kill agriculture in order for that metropolitan area to survive.
Right. No argument. I mean, that's something of the future that you haven't seen as much, but is if water gets shorter, and it will in years, it cycles. That's when you see it raise its ugly head, because how thirsty do you have to be before you want to do whatever it takes to quench that thirst?
Right.
And it starts out with not watering your lawn. Look how people get in town get just apoplectic about not being able to water their lawn every damn day, keeping their lawn green, and they go crazy. Okay, to me, that's kind of that's a social issue and a out of touch issue about, okay, what's the larger good here for you? You want to have a lawn or you want to eat?
Yeah, that's a nice to have, not a need to have.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
No, well, and we were talking about courts and stuff. I think that's important. Who do you think is going to win that one? Because there's a lot of money behind metropolitan areas that would say, hey, we need the water more importantly to survive. Right. But then there's also those that on the agriculture side, we may have one or two lobbying companies in our favor, but majority are going to side with the metropolitan areas. Who do you think wins overall? Because realistically, if agriculture loses, the food market, whether it's livestock or grain, it'll crash.
Well, it's because people don't understand where their food comes from. If they did, they would be like, ooh, yeah. But I mean, this is typical of, if I don't like something, I'm going to litigate it.
Right.
I mean, that's just the way our society is. It has been, and it's even worse today. I think it's worse now than it ever has been, and I don't see it getting any better. But to me, the litigation and it's something like that is, they're going to look at that and they're going to go, oh, who benefits more? And they're looking at short term, not long term.
Yeah.
Who needs this more? So this is kind of using a democracy in a litigation and saying, okay, we're going to have a vote here. We got two wolves and a sheep voting on what's going to happen for dinner.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. So what do you think's what's the way to go about trying to fix that, other than continuing, like people like us trying to share information about this, and in a way that's not, it's not off-putting to others, but it's informative and saying, these are the very real implications of things. Right. And I think something, we've talked about this before. Climate change is very real. It's a thing it's cyclic. We've talked about that. It's a thing that occurs. We're looking at where we had a long but somewhat mild winter last year. We're potentially looking at a very long and cold, hard one this year. But then things like that cycle also occur with water,
Right.
and that affects decisions and stuff like that. So how is it that we are able to potentially inform people of, this is a very real thing, but at the same time, it's something we all need to be on board with together and do it together?
I think talking about it just like we're doing, and I don't mean to say that. Look, just because we are in agriculture and we're feeding people, that's a priority. It will be somebody's priority at some time, but people who are living in a metro area, they need water.
Yeah.
Let's face it. I mean, they have to live. They may be there by choice or by birth. I mean, there's both circumstances there, but they still have to live too. And so being kind of smart about what we're doing is one thing. Now, uh, some of our practices, I think, is where that's probably an appropriate, uh, maybe an educational thing for not only us, but for the population at large. Flood irrigation is a very inefficient use of your water. There's a ton of evaporation that takes place.
Right.
Um,
But doesn't that evaporation create humidity and growth as well? That would be like
well,
a devil's advocate to that.
it does, but does it do it the good that it should? Like you've dumped all this water on here. Well, let's
Yeah.
let's talk about this. If you have say a pivot and you're sprinkling that water on there, you're losing some to evaporation there as well, right?
Right.
You're not covering the ground with it. Is that evaporation helping you? Well, some not, especially when the wind's blowing, you see it, you know, being diverted. So some of the best and the higher technology, and in some areas it's practical to do it, feasible. I shouldn't say practical. It's feasible, meaning that it can be done physically. Is underground um, irrigation, where they run pipe literally and tube, and they just saturate the ground. Well, that's going to be very, very efficient, and you're not going to have a lot of loss with your evaporation. However, it is expensive,
Yeah.
super expensive, and very impractical to do because of the expense. And now, what do you do with that ground? Can you till it?
No, you can't. Probably not.
Well, you can, but you got to be careful because it's got to be done at a certain depth or certain crops. I mean, you're not going to be able to roll that necessarily, like you would just, digging a plow in the ground and turning that stuff over so that you can, flip those nutrients in the ground and be able to replant. There's a lot to that, but I think that's some of where we're going in the future, because it's more about the conservation of water, still usage and maximizing it, but it's about conservation too. But that's almost like a highway infrastructure deal if you did
Yeah.
that, and if it's depending on each individual producer to do that, you may or may not have even limited success with it because the outrageous expense. I don't think you could cover your costs easily. Certainly not within a year or two. I mean, it's going to be astronomical. But those are some of the things that I think we need to look at. You know, taking salt water and cleaning it up. There's another one. I mean, there's all
Well, we
kinds
already
of
have
things.
water treatment plants. Why not just do that to ocean as well? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's desalination that goes on. I think a lot of larger cities that are on the coast, but um, that's not practical to ship that stuff inland either. I mean, you're you're getting beyond your cost of investment to do that. But for some of your larger cities, that may be something that's feasible to do. And whenever you do that, and you put more in the atmosphere, then that's not a bad thing either, because you are actually um, throwing some usable water into the atmosphere to be wrung out later on. Our oceans do that as well. They're not evaporating salt or evaporating water.
Yeah.
So I mean, we have to have that.
Um, you threw out the idea of like some sort of water infrastructure. How What do you think would be better? Doing something like that where it's a giant government project to try and assist with development of things like that, or would it be better to subsidize and potentially assist agricultural industries, businesses ranches, farms in investing in things like newer technology with top of the line pivot systems, wheel line systems, stuff like that? Like which do you think would probably have the most bang for the buck and more efficient use?
Well, I don't know. Your pivots and stuff are more easily done. I mean, they're a quick, you can have I've seen them build a pivot in a week on a place, from start to finish. And that's pretty impressive. And, put 100 acres, 160 acres, under irrigation. So that's pretty fast. I think, your underground stuff, that's going to be trenching, connecting pipes, lots of other type of delivery systems that I don't know that much about, honestly. So I'm not sure what it would take. Just off the top of my head and what I've read about them is, it's significant. The problem with the government, show me something that they've done efficiently and didn't screw up. I mean, so there's
I'm sure
that.
there's something. I can't
Uh,
tell it to you.
yeah, but ultimately,
Uh,
when you're looking at what's going to work, usually things that are market driven work.
right.
If you can figure out a way to do something and it makes sense and it makes money, you got your market. And that's how we've always done everything. So, there are some things that are by need that are done that way. And for instance, us, I'm looking at trying to do something with a pivot. See if we can get something to, if we can't raise our own hay, um, and maybe I'm just overreacting because we've went a lot of years and largely done just fine by purchasing hay from others, but this has been a kind of an unusual year.
I don't think
So
you are, but we'll talk about that later.
yeah, well, and it's going to change the way we do business, which is fine. I mean, we need to
Yeah.
do it'll help us diversify a little
Mhm.
bit more in our own products. So it's not a bad thing, but man, it's expensive. And when people think that you can just get a government help, and I don't want government help. I mean, oh God, it
Well,
just
what's the main reason other than I don't trust the government? The big reason is there's always there's a catch of some sort, and typically I would imagine, I don't know the answer to this, if the government were to subsidize or assist in the funding or the building of some sort of water development system, there would be a catch such as a 50-year lease or
right,
50-year um hitch where you have to provide that water or only pull so much of that water for so long. Like that's the kind of, would it be necessarily 50 years? No, but
right. You're just
but there's
examples. Yeah,
but there's a thing where I could see the government has that ability to limit things because, for example, it would be for hay, is what you were saying, which is crop production. Well,
right,
what happens? The army, the government oftentimes subsidizes producers to not produce in order to create a certain profit, well, not necessarily profit, but a certain price
market.
for, yeah, the market, which then therefore allows others to make a living and so on and so forth. Because if you make too much, then you don't have, you've got over production, and then prices tank and stuff like that. So there are things like that, but that's where kind of my head goes with that, is there would be a catch to it, and that would be the
Right,
biggest limiting factor, at least from a business perspective, why you should not do it. But that's
right.
business
Well,
perspective.
and there's the other thing too. You think the government's not in control. Um, did you ever run across that in any of your historical things about what's the smallest crop size that in acreage that you can grow by
the
law?
the smallest you can grow?
Yep.
I
There's a limit.
I don't know that.
Yeah. You must, if you're going to raise agricultural crops, you cannot have them any smaller than, and I think it was like 10 acres or something like that. So
Makes
tell me, I
sense.
don't know how strictly it's enforced, but tell me how the government is not in control of that, or doesn't have the ability to have a big hammer if you go either one way or the other. And you're right. I
Right.
think there can be restrictions or caveats to whatever you do. Now, I've had a number of people tell me, I've been talking about, exploring this pivot because we've got water underneath us. We know that.
Well, and actually, this leads to the next part too. The differentiating the difference between uh, river and stream access, well access, and ditch rights, because you're talking where we would want to place the pivot is over the top of essentially a giant, what we think is a either a giant river or a giant lake of some sort underneath the ground. It's called an artesian well. So what are some of those differences between those accesses that allow people to pull water, pump water, divert water, that type of thing?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there are set water rights, and you can sell water rights on your streams, your open streams that water is taken directly out of or diverted into your ditches or canals. So that's still water. That's still river water. So that's all kind of the same thing, and then your water rights are distributed and given so many acre feet of water by whatever you have for your right. Now your wells are a little bit different where that's on your property, but they kind of control how much they give out, is my understanding, on water rights too.
And this is state,
That's
correct?
the
Or the
problem. That's
DNRC?
yes,
Okay.
DNRC. And so that's kind of the caveat there to that is, okay, you can spend 30,000, 40, 50,000 putting a well down, getting some water. Can you use it?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you allowed to use it? So there's a huge risk in there. And who in the hell wants to spend that kind of money to, dig a hole in the ground you can't use anymore?
Right.
So there's some real risk there. And that's why I'm really trying to be very, very careful about what I'm doing. And I've had, again, I started to tell you, I've had so many people that have pivots or don't have, but they see the outside, the need, and they're not even in agriculture. And they go, well, can you get any assistance from the government? I mean, that's one of the first questions, and they're like, oh,
I
yeah, I
have
mean,
such a personal issue with those questions. Like the
right,
fact that people are asking that in the first place, it brings on that issue where everybody thinks everyone in agriculture, everybody outside of agriculture thinks that those within it have this innate ability to just hitch onto the government and let them, help do whatever they need to do. First
right,
of all, I have I have so many political issues with this. Yeah, but the other thing too is it's just pride, man. Like, why do you
yeah,
think you need the government to do the job for you? Like, at some point, you gotta. This is an issue with a whole lot of other things, but frankly, it's accountability. Like, just be accountable for your own actions and your own decisions, and stop relying on the government to make those decisions and those actions for you. And they would, oh,
Well,
yeah,
and,
I
and part of the issue is they're just trying to problem solve for you. They're
I
just
know,
trying to
but
help.
that's the
Yeah.
wrong way to problem solve. The fact that we as a people have decided that the first answer is always, well, what can the government do? That is the
Right.
number
I,
one
I, I
reason I
agree.
have with a lot of things right now politically.
Well, and the reason why we've gone there is because how many people are able to really make it without the government help, because we're squeezed so
Right.
hard from, guess what? Government regulation,
Well,
government,
or outsiders like the Packers. I mean, hey,
still government.
think,
I mean, there's
think
a lot of control there.
yeah, I was like, thanks for squeezing that one in, Calen. Yeah, you're welcome. This is the beef channel, man. No, like the Packers though, like, because it's the same thing.
Yeah.
They're an outsider that has managed to find a way to squeeze us, the producers, out. And
And they're using government regulation to do it.
and they are, yeah, and that's where, yeah, I see where you're coming from with it, but it's just very frustrating. But
Yeah.
anyway,
I'm
trying to get access
like
to it.
you, we have taken some of that. And we're like, oh God, I just cringe, you know? And so I asked the guy at the DNRC, I said, okay, talk to me about this. What is this? What is this cost share? What does that mean? And he goes, well, we can cost share like 40%. And he said, no strings. I mean, it just is. We're just trying to build some
No strings attached.
conservation area, and some cropland. And like, okay, all right. And I'm sitting there thinking, 40%. That's a significant amount, or
So they
can
would
be.
fund 40%. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So if you were to
Yeah.
throw 100, let's say you're trying to get $100,000 pivot, you would
Right.
have to front 60, and they would front the 40.
Right.
Okay.
But then he asked, well, what's the irrigation history on this piece of property? I said, well,
0.
none. It's dry land, but we got water underneath. But there are pivots in the area, not close to us really, but about 3 miles away. There's a pivot that is pretty strong, but they pull our water out of the creek.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, no history. I said, no. And he goes, oh, well, we can't help you then. You have to establish history in order to qualify for that. And I said, okay, so we have to definitely have had like 2 years worth of irrigation and show that it was irrigated and records on it. And he goes, yeah. So, so it doesn't matter. You're
It's
right back
almost
to
where you want to set up something with one or two.
sprinklers.
Well, no, I mean, like you set up a pivot with one or two uh spans and you develop that and then you try and build off that slowly, but I don't know.
Well, and that's one thought. The other thought I had was, and your mother actually come up with this, and she may have some valid points to it, because she got to looking around about different sprinkler systems and wheel lines, and I'm like, oh God, wheel lines. They're better than flood irrigating, but I mean, you're still it's
Very
irrigating.
good. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, but you're moving all that pipe and you got to store it, and what a pain. And she says, what if we did the well, piped it to where you want it to go, like you would a pivot, and then we rent a wheel line and sprinkle with a wheel line for a couple of years, and you rent all of that, which I mean, it
Man,
could happen.
this is the reality of water and trying to use water.
This is yes. I mean, it just shows you the importance and what lengths you have to think and go to possibly get the water. Now when your grandpa had that one well drilled, there was an 80-year-old guy been drilling for God knows how long, and he stopped in the middle of his drilling. Maybe we've talked about this before. And he stopped and he come to the house and he tells Dad, he goes, I've never heard this before. He says, it sounds like I pulled this pipe up, to change drills or stem. And he said, it sounds like water's running underneath that. I've never heard that before. And Dad goes, yeah, it doesn't surprise me. It happened on this other well up here. And he goes, holy crap. He said, I knew you had water under there, but I didn't realize like this. So I think we have just this big aquifer under there that, where does it go? Comes out in some springs and stuff, different areas. And so it's kind of trapped right there. And if we can suck into that, then we're good to go. But big time cost up front, and hopefully for a okay payoff later, but it takes money to do that. And that's the problem right now. If we had that kind of money, we wouldn't be quite so worried about hanging on to cows, because I would just buy much more hay and keep them.
True.
Right.
I guess we've got about 13 minutes left, and let me write this down because I will forget. All right. We've kind of talked about getting access to things, the slight differences in water access, how important water is to the overall use of agriculture, both in crops, but now like we're looking at it from our perspective, livestock. We may have to what is it? Dally ourselves?
Dabble.
There you go. Couldn't find the word. Found it. Dabble.
You found 4 others that don't apply.
dabble in a little bit of crop production, but there are also concerns with water.
Get back to dabbling.
Yeah, there are some concerns, such as, for example, water for us in Montana primarily comes from snow caps, which becomes runoff in the springtime and summer, and that's how we get the water. The snow caps up in the mountains, they stay there, they store themselves over winter storms and everything, and then as they slowly melt away, they become the runoff that you see with the Yellowstone, which then turns into the Missouri, which then turns into the Mississippi. We already discussed issues that we have with, particularly looking mostly on the western part of Montana, which doesn't matter, with taking water towards LA and Las Vegas. But then on the eastern side with us, it's Yellowstone, Missouri, and so on and so forth. But what are some of the growing concerns that we have from the eastern side in terms with housing development, mine and energy access? Because I know a guy personally who him and his family have been fighting a specific mine up by Great Falls with water access, and then finally recreational use. So what are some of the issues that come with water in those 3 big ones?
Well, basically that is there enough water? And then what is the quality of the water on development, and
Mhm.
not just you're talking, if you got a housing development, which we have tons of sprawl. We've got a lot of sprawl here on some of these larger cities, and we say larger cities here, Montana. Billings, for instance, is what 120,000.
It floats at, so the Yellowstone County is the biggest. It floats at 150 total,
Yeah,
150,000.
so
The
around
city
100.
of Billings and the suburban area around it is about 130,000.
Okay, so it wasn't that long ago. That was like 80,000.
Right.
And so we're not growing up, we're growing out. We got all this
Yeah.
sprawl, so you've got all these housing developments, and you know what, most of those they're drilling wells, wanting wells, or they're on city water, and that's if they're close.
Yeah.
So but that's still supplying water to a place that what's the average household go through for water in a day?
I
100
don't
gallon.
know. I
Yeah.
don't know, but you're gonna have to look, because you're looking showers, you're looking things as simple as brushing teeth, washing
Right.
dishes, making
Toilets.
making ice, toilets.
Yep.
You're not talking just drinking. You're talking, preparing food, all
It's
sorts of stuff.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll bet you're a family of four. You're in the neighborhood of 100, a little over 100 gallon a day would be my
Yeah.
my wild guess.
It'd be interesting to see that, that's for sure.
Yeah. So you've got that. You've got the more water usage, which yes, is it more or not? Where did they come from? Were they using water in town somewhere? Well, they probably were. But now, did they have a lawn in town? Now they got a lawn because they're out in the hills, and now I want to be self sufficient. Out in the hills means the edge of city limits,
Yeah.
where they've got brand new pipes going down, and now they're going to be self sufficient and grow a garden. Okay, good for you. Still takes water. When you got a housing development like that as well, what's one of the biggest concerns you've got is sewage. Where's that
Right.
sewage going to go? Where's that going to leach to? So it's about water quality. After that, same thing with the mine, and that's the whole issue with mining. We did learn some serious and painful lessons in the 1800s, early 1900s in the state with some of the
Butte.
gold mines
Yeah.
in Leach. Crown Butte's a big one. Soda Butte Creek was sterile. I've never known that thing to have fish, and now it's starting to see fish finally, but they did a lot of cleanup on it.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
and
you just
it took a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of
Yep.
man hours in order to get to that point, though.
Right. That was the gold fever days where they didn't care. I was like, hey, we dig this stuff up. We'll use whatever it takes to get this out of here.
Yeah.
And some of these leach fields and stuff. So we had tremendous water quality issues with that. And we've gotten better at that. And I'm not a fan of the EPA by any means. And I've never claimed to be. However, if it wasn't for some of the things that has been done along those lines, we probably wouldn't have much clean water at all. So
Right.
there's a happy balance there as well, to that. But your mining is a big deal, and it's got to be done right. Of course, every business in the world is trying to do what they do for the least amount of money so they have the most amount of return. And that's the problem, is that's the weak link as I see it, is yeah, you can be bonded and insured, and most of the time the bonding and insure amount for a business doesn't even come close to what it would really take to do it, and they just walk away from it. And it's like, okay, well, you got the bond. They're insured for $1 million or $10 million, and it's a $400 million cleanup cost of doing business. And there's people that think like that.
Yeah.
So that's an issue, and that weak link is how good are the systems in place, how robust are they, so that you do maintain a good water quality, so you don't have containment and contaminant issues later on in 50 years or 100 years. So those are some of the bigger issues. I think if you did it right up front, you reduce that risk, or you have other kinds of fail safes, two different systems, one backs up the other, that kind of stuff. But that's a lot of money up front, and a lot of companies won't do it then because they don't want to put that money forth in order to uh be able to continue to do business.
Now we're about 3.5 miles, almost four, probably closer to four, south of a stream. So there's no reason for us to have recreational visitors, but there's a lot of people within agriculture that they do have that issue, and it's gone through Montana courts multiple times because of this. What are some of the recreational uses of water in Montana, and how do those affect livestock and agriculture in general?
Well, I mean, you get your stream access law, I think is what you're basically talking about. And that means basically that if it's a navigable stream, and that term is okay, navigable to what? An inner
Yeah.
tube, a boat, so that's kind of a nebulous term as well. And I used to have to try to enforce some of those laws. But we've got fishing, you got hunting, and you can hunt by boat. You got to have access and get down through uh, the stream wherever you're at and be able to get out and without getting on somebody's property, which can be a little different, a little tough. And some of these islands are privately owned. Some are owned by the state. So it changes a lot. And it's kind of dealing and taking a chance on having a landowner that is going to work with you or not in the base case to try to get some hunting access if you're doing that, or fishing. But those are some of the things. Just plain boating, just going out and doing stuff. Trapping is another one. You trap a lot of beaver and stuff along the river. Most of the time people are happy to have you trap beaver out. They're doing a lot of destruction on big cottonwoods, big established stuff, causing dams, causing erosion of the banks and stuff too. And they're going to lose ground if they don't. But yeah, we don't have that issue. We don't have any live water out there like that. I wish we did. That'd be awesome. Number of purposes that we could put that to, but it's really not something that we're able to utilize.
All right, that is water for today. Good old H2O in agriculture. It's vital, it's important, it's everywhere. And I guess it's Dad's turn now.
And so it's a good time to say, we thank you till you're better paid.